But see! Through the fast-flashing lightnings of war, what steed to the desert flies frantic and far? Campbell. During the severe skirmish of which we have given the details, Morton, together with Cuddy and his mother, and the Reverend Gabriel Kettledrummel, remained on the brow of the hill, near to the small cairn, or barrow, beside which Claverhouse had held his preliminary council of war, so that they had a commanding view of the action which took place in the bottom. They were guarded by Corporal Inglis and 4 soldiers, who, as may readily be supposed, were much more intent on watching the fluctuating fortunes of the battle, than in attending to what passed among their prisoners. "If you lads stand to their tackle," said Cuddy, "we'll hae some chance o' getting our necks out o' the brechem again, but I misdoubt them, they hae little skill o' arms." "Much is not necessary, Cuddy," answered Morton, "they have a strong position, and weapons in their hands, and are more than 3 times the number of their assailants. If they cannot fight for their freedom now, they and theirs deserve to lose it forever." "Oh, sirs," exclaimed Mouse, "here's a goodly spectacle indeed. My spirit is like that of the blessed Elihu, it burns within me, my bowels are as wine which lacketh vent, they are ready to burst like new bottles. Oh, that he may look after his own people in this day of judgment and deliverance. And now, what ailest thou, precious Mr. Gabriel Kettledrummel? I say, what ailest thou, that wert a Nazarite purer than snow, whiter than milk, more ruddy than sulphur, meaning, perhaps, sapphires? I say, what ails thee now, that thou art blacker than a coal, that thy beauty is departed, and thy loveliness withered like a dry potsherd? Surely it is time to be up and be doing, to cry loudly and to spare not, and to wrestle for the puir lads that are yonder testifying with their own blood and that of their enemies." This expostulation implied a reproach on Mr. Kettledrummel, who, though an absolute Boanerges, or son of thunder, in the pulpit, when the enemy were afar, and indeed sufficiently contumacious, as we have seen, when in their power, had been struck dumb by the firing, shouts, and shrieks, which now arose from the valley, and, as many an honest man might have been, in a situation where he could neither fight nor fly, was too much dismayed to take so favorable an opportunity to preach the terrors of Presbytery, as the courageous Mouse had expected at his hand, or even to pray for the successful event of the battle. His presence of mind was not, however, entirely lost, any more than his jealous respect for his reputation as a pure and powerful preacher of the word. "Hold your peace, woman," he said, "and do not perturb my inward meditations and the wrestlings wherewith I wrestled at, but of a verity the shooting of the foemen doth begin to increase. Peradventure, some pellet may attain unto us even here. Lo! I will ensconce me behind the cairn, as behind a strong wall of defense." "He's but a coward body after it," said Cuddy, who was himself by no means deficient in that sort of courage which consists in insensibility to danger. "He's but a daitling coward body. He'll never fill Rumbleberry's bonnet. Odd. Rumbleberry fought in flight like a fleeing dragon. It was a great pity, poor man, he couldna cheat the woody. But they say he gied singing and rejoicing tilt, just as I wad gang to a bicker o' bros, supposing me hungry, as I stand a good chance to be at sirs. Yon's an awfu' sight, and yet ane canna keep their ain affray it." Accordingly, strong curiosity on the part of Morton and Cuddy, together with the heated enthusiasm of old Mouse, detained them on the spot from which they could best hear and see the issue of the action, leaving to Kettledrummel to occupy alone his place of security. The vicissitudes of combat, which we have already described, were witnessed by our spectators from the top of the eminence, but without their being able positively to determine to what they tended. That the Presbyterians defended themselves stoutly was evident from the heavy smoke, which, illumined by frequent flashes of fire, now eddied along the valley, and hid the contending parties in its sulphureous shade. On the other hand, the continued firing from the nearer side of the morass indicated that the enemy persevered in their attack, that the affair was fiercely disputed, and that everything was to be apprehended from a continued contest in which undisciplined rustics had to repel the assaults of regular troops, so completely officered and armed. At length horses, whose caparisons showed that they belonged to the lifeguards, began to fly masterless out of the confusion. Dismounted soldiers next appeared, forsaking the conflict, and straggling over the side of the hill, in order to escape from the scene of action. As the numbers of these fugitives increased, the fate of the day seemed no longer doubtful. A large body was then seen emerging from the smoke, forming irregularly on the hillside, and with difficulty kept stationary by their officers, until Evandale's corps also appeared in full retreat. The result of the conflict was then apparent, and the joy of the prisoners was corresponding to their approaching deliverance. "They hae doon the job for aince," said Cutty, "and they ne'er do't again." They flee," exclaimed Mouse, in ecstasy. "Oh, the truculent tyrants! They are riding now as they never rode before. Oh, the false Egyptians, the proud Assyrians, the Philistines, the Moabites, the Edomites, the Ishmaelites, the Lord has brought sharp swords upon them, to make them food for the fowls of heaven and the beasts of the field. See how the clouds roll, and the fire flashes ahint them, and goes forth before the chosen of the covenant, e'en like the pillar o' cloud and the pillar o' flame that led the people of Israel out o' the land of Egypt. This is indeed a day of deliverance to the righteous, a day of pouring out of wrath to the persecutors and the ungodly." "Lord save us, mither," said Cutty, "haud the clavering tongue o' ye, and lie down ahint the cairn, like kettle drummel, honest man. The Whigamore bullets can unco little discretion, and will just as soon knock out the harns o' a psalm-singing old wife as a swearing dragoon." "Fear naething for me, Cutty," said the old dame, transported to ecstasy by the success of her party, "fear naething for me. I will stand, like Deborah, on the tap o' the cairn, and tack up my sang o' reproach against these men of Harasheth of the Gentiles, whose horsehoofs are broken by their prancing." The enthusiastic old woman would, in fact, have accomplished her purpose of mounting on the cairn, and becoming, as she said, a sign and a banner to the people, had not Cutty, with more filial tenderness than respect, detained her by such force as his shackled arms would permit him to exert. Sirs," he said, having accomplished this task, "look out yonder, Milwood, saw ye ever mortal fight like the deevil claver as yonder he's been thrice down amang them, and thrice come free aftot, but I think we'll soon be free ourselves, Milwood. Inglis and his troopers look ower their shouters very aften, as if they liked the road ahint them better than the road afore." Cutty was not mistaken, for, when the main tide of fugitives passed at a little distance from the spot where they were stationed, the corporal and his party fired their carabines at random upon the advancing insurgents, and, abandoning all charge of their prisoners, joined the retreat of their comrades. Morton and the old woman, whose hands were at liberty, lost no time in undoing the bonds of Cutty and of the clergyman, both of whom had been secured by a cord tied round their arms above the elbows. By the time this was accomplished, the rear guard of the dragoons, which still preserved some order, passed beneath the hillock or rising ground which was surmounted by the cairn already repeatedly mentioned. They exhibited all the hurry and confusion incident to a forced retreat, but still continued in a body. Claverhouse led the van, his naked sword deeply dyed with blood, as were his face and clothes. His horse was all covered with gore, and now reeled with weakness. Lord Evandale, in not much better plight, brought up the rear, still exhorting the soldiers to keep together and fear nothing. Several of the men were wounded, and one or two dropped from their horses as they surmounted the hill. Mouse's zeal broke forth once more at this spectacle, while she stood on the heath with her head uncovered, and her grey hairs streaming in the wind, no bad representation of a superannuated Bacchante, or Thessalian witch in the agonies of incantation. She soon discovered Claverhouse at the head of the fugitive party, and exclaimed with bitter irony, "Tarry, ye were sae blithe to be at the meetings of the saints, and wad ride every mere in Scotland to find a conventicle. Wilt thou not tarry, now thou hast found ane? Wilt thou not stay for one word mair? Wilt thou not bide the afternoon preaching? Wae betide ye," she said, suddenly changing her tone, "and cut the hoofs of the creature ways fleetness ye trust in, sheog, awawai, that hae spilled sae muckle blood, and now wad save your an awawai for a railing rabshake, a cursing shimmy, a bloodthirsty dog, the swords drawn now that winna be lang o' overtaking ye, ride as fast as ye will." Claverhouse, it may be easily supposed, was too busy to attend to her reproaches, but hastened over the hill, anxious to get the remnant of his men out of gunshot, in hopes of again collecting the fugitives round his standard. But as the rear of his followers rode over the ridge, a shot struck Lord Evandale's horse, which instantly sunk down dead beneath him. Two of the Whig horsemen, who were the foremost in the pursuit, hastened up with the purpose of killing him, for hitherto there had been no quarter given. Morton, on the other hand, rushed forward to save his life, if possible, in order at once to indulge his natural generosity, and to requite the obligation which Lord Evandale had conferred on him that morning, and under which circumstances had made him wince so acutely. Just as he had assisted Evandale, who was much wounded, to extricate himself from his dying horse, and to gain his feet, the two horsemen came up, and one of them exclaiming, "Have at the red-coated tyrant," made a blow at the young nobleman, which Morton parried with difficulty, exclaiming to the rider, who was no other than Burleigh himself, "Give quarter to this gentleman, for my sake, for the sake," he added, observing that Burleigh did not immediately recognize him, "of Henry Morton, who so lately sheltered you." "Henry Morton," replied Burleigh, wiping his bloody brow with his bloodier hand, "did I not say that the son of Silas Morton would come forth out of the land of bondage, nor be long an indweller in the tents of Ham? Thou art a brand snatched out of the burning, but for this booted apostle of prelacy, he shall die the death. We must smite them hip and thigh, even from the rising to the going down of the sun. It is our commission to slay them like Amalek, and utterly destroy all they have, and spare neither man nor woman, infant nor suckling. Therefore, hinder me not," he continued, endeavoring again to cut down Lord Evandale, "for this work must not be wrought negligently. You must not, and you shall not, slay him, more especially while incapable of defense," said Morton, planting himself before Lord Evandale so as to intercept any blow that should be aimed at him. "I owed my life to him this morning, my life, which was endangered solely by my having sheltered you, and to shed his blood when he can offer no effectual resistance, were not only a cruelty abhorrent to God and man, but detestable ingratitude both to him and to me." Burleigh paused to, "Thou art yet," he said, "in the court of the Gentiles, and I compassionate thy human blindness and frailty. Strong meat is not fit for babes, nor the mighty and grinding dispensation under which I draw my sword, for those whose hearts are yet dwelling in huts of clay, whose footsteps are tangled in the mesh of mortal sympathies, and who clothe themselves in the righteousness that is as filthy rags. But to gain a soul to the truth is better than to send one to Tophet. Therefore I give quarter to this youth, providing the grant is confirmed by the general council of God's army, whom he hath this day blessed with so signal a deliverance. Thou art unarmed, abide my return here. I must yet pursue these sinners, the Amalekites, and destroy them till they be utterly consumed from the face of the land, even from Havilah unto Shur." So saying, he set spurs to his horse, and continued to pursue the chase. "Cuddy," said Morton, "for God's sake catch a horse as quickly as you can. I will not trust Lord Evandale's life with these obdurate men. You are wounded, my lord. Are you able to continue your retreat?" he continued, addressing himself to his prisoner, who, half stunned by the fall, was but beginning to recover himself. "I think so," replied Lord Evandale. "But is it possible? Do I owe my life to Mr. Morton?" "My interference would have been the same from common humanity," replied Morton. "To your lordship it was a sacred debt of gratitude." Cuddy at this instant returned with a horse. "Godsake, munt, and ride like a fleeing hawk, my lord," said the good-natured fellow, "for ne'er be in me, if they arena killing every ane o' the wounded and prisoners." Lord Evandale mounted the horse, while Cuddy officiously held the stirrup. "Stand off, good fellow, thy courtesy may cost thy life, Mr. Morton," he continued, addressing Henry. "This makes us more than even rely on it. I will never forget your generosity. Farewell." He turned his horse, and rode swiftly away in the direction which seemed least exposed to pursuit. Lord Evandale had just rode off, when several of the insurgents, who were in the front of the pursuit, came up, denouncing vengeance on Henry Morton and Cuddy for having aided the escape of a Philistine, as they called the young nobleman. "What wad ye hae had us to do?" cried Cuddy. "Had we ought to stop a man why that had TWA pistols and a sword? Sudna ye hae come faster up yourselves, instead of flighting at huz? This excuse would hardly have passed current, but Kettledrummel, who now awoke from his trance of terror, and was known to, and reverenced by, most of the wanderers, together with Mouse, who possessed their appropriate language as well as the preacher himself, proved active and effectual intercessors. "Touch them not, harm them not," exclaimed Kettledrummel, in his very best double bass tones. "This is the son of the famous Silas Morton, by whom the Lord wrought great things in this land at the breaking forth of the Reformation from prelacy, when there was a plentiful pouring forth of the word and a renewing of the covenant, a hero and champion of those blessed days, when there was power and efficacy, and convincing and converting of sinners, and heart exercises, and fellowships of saints, and a plentiful flowing forth of the spices of the Garden of Eden." "And this is my son Cuddy," exclaimed Mouse, in her turn, "the son of his father, Jud den Hedrig, wha was a douce honest man, and of me, Mouse Middlemus, an unworthy professor and follower of the pure gospel, and ane o' your own folk. Is it not written, cut ye not off the tribe of the families of the Kohathites from among the Levites? Numbers, 4th and 18th o. Sirs, dinna be standing here prattling why honest folk, when ye sould be following forth your victory with which Providence has blessed ye." This party having passed on, they were immediately beset by another, to whom it was necessary to give the same explanation. Kettledrummel, whose fear was much dissipated since the firing had ceased, again took upon him to be intercessor, and grown bold, as he felt his good word necessary for the protection of his late fellow captives. He laid claim to no small share of the merit of the victory, appealing to Morton and Cuddy, whether the tide of battle had not turned while he prayed on the Mount of Jehovah Nissi, like Moses, that Israel might prevail over Amalek, but granting them, at the same time, the credit of holding up his hands when they waxed heavy, as those of the prophet were supported by Aaron and Hur. It seems probable that Kettledrummel allotted this part in the success to his companions in adversity, lest they should be tempted to disclose his carnal self-seeking and falling away, in regarding too closely his own personal safety. These strong testimonies in favor of the liberated captives quickly flew abroad, with many exaggerations, among the victorious army. The reports on the subject were various, but it was universally agreed that young Morton of Milnwood, the son of the stout soldier of the Covenant, Silas Morton, together with the precious Gabriel Kettledrummel, and a singular devout Christian woman, whom many thought as good as himself at extracting a doctrine or in use, whether of terror or consolation, had arrived to support the good old cause, with a reinforcement of 100 well-armed men from the Middle Ward. Note: skirmish at Drumclog. This affair, the only one in which Claverhouse was defeated, or the insurgent Cameronians successful, was fought pretty much in the manner mentioned in the text. The Royalists lost about 30 or 40 men. The commander of the Presbyterian, or rather Covenanting party, was Mr. Robert Hamilton, of the Honourable House of Preston, brother of Sir William Hamilton, to whose title and estate he afterwards succeeded, but, according to his biographer, Howie of Lochgowan, he never took possession of either, as he could not do so without acknowledging the right of King William, an uncovenanted monarch, to the crown. Hamilton had been bred by Bishop Burnet, while the latter lived at Glasgow, his brother, Sir Thomas, having married a sister of that historian. He was then, says the bishop, a lively, hopeful young man, but getting into that company, and into their notions, he became a crack-brained enthusiast. Several well-meaning persons have been much scandalized at the manner in which the victors are said to have conducted themselves towards the prisoners at Drumclog. But the principle of these poor fanatics, I mean the high-flying, or Cameronian party, was to obtain not merely toleration for their church, but the same supremacy which Presbytery had acquired in Scotland after the Treaty of Ripon, betwixt Charles I and his Scottish subjects, in 1640. The fact is, that they conceived themselves a chosen people, sent forth to extirpate the heathen, like the Jews of old, and under a similar charge to show no quarter. The historian of the insurrection of Bothwell makes the following explicit avowal of the principles on which their general acted. Mr. Hamilton discovered a great deal of bravery and valor, both in the conflict with, and pursuit of, the enemy, but when he and some other were pursuing the enemy, others flew too greedily upon the spoil, small as it was, instead of pursuing the victory, and some, without Mr. Hamilton's knowledge, and directly contrary to his express command, gave 5 of those bloody enemies quarter, and then let them go. This greatly grieved Mr. Hamilton when he saw some of Babel's brats spared. After that, the Lord had delivered them into their hands, that they might dash them against the stones. Psalm 9. In his own account of this, he reckons the sparing of these enemies, and letting them go, to be among their first steppings aside, for which he feared that the Lord would not honor them to do much more for him, and says, that he was neither for taking favors from, nor giving favors to, the Lord's enemies. See a true and impartial account of the persecuted Presbyterians in Scotland, their being in arms, and defeated Bothwell Brigg, in 1679, by William Wilson, late schoolmaster in the parish of Douglas. The reader who would authenticate the quotation must not consult any other edition than that of 1697, for somehow or other the publisher of the last edition has omitted this remarkable part of the narrative. Sir Robert Hamilton himself felt neither remorse nor shame for having put to death one of the prisoners after the battle with his own hand, which appears to have been a charge against him, by some whose fanaticism was less exalted than his own. As for that accusation they bring against me of killing that poor man, as they call him, at Drumclog, I may easily guess that my accusers can be no other but some of the house of Saul or Shimei, or some such risen again to espouse that poor gentleman, Saul, his quarrel against honest Samuel, for his offering to kill that poor man Agag, after the king's giving him quarter. But I, being to command that day, gave off the word that no quarter should be given, and returning from pursuing Claverhouse, 1 or 2 of these fellows were standing in the midst of a company of our friends, and some were debating for quarter, others against it. None could blame me to decide the controversy, and I bless the Lord for it to this day. There were 5 more that without my knowledge got quarter, who were brought to me after we were a mile from the place as having got quarter, which I reckoned among the first steppings aside, and seeing that spirit amongst us at that time, I then told it to some that were with me, to my best remembrance, it was honest old John Nisbet, that I feared the Lord would not honor us to do much more for him. I shall only say this, I desire to bless his holy name, that since ever he helped me to set my face to his work, I never had, nor would take, a favor from enemies, either on right or left hand, and desired to give as few. The preceding passage is extracted from a long vindication of his own conduct, sent by Sir Robert Hamilton, December 7, 1685, addressed to the antipopish, antiprelatic, anti-Erastian, anti-sectarian true Presbyterian remnant of the Church of Scotland, and the substance is to be found in the work or collection, called Faithful Contendings Displayed, collected, and transcribed by John Howie. As the skirmish of Drumclog has been of late the subject of some inquiry, the reader may be curious to see Claverhouse's own account of the affair, in a letter to the Earl of Linlithgow, written immediately after the action. This gazette, as it may be called, occurs in the volume called Dundee's Letters, printed by Mr. Smythe of Methven, as a contribution to the Bannatyne Club. The original is in the library of the Duke of Buckingham. Claverhouse, it may be observed, spells like a chambermaid. For the Earl of Linlithgow, Commander-in-Chief of King Charles II's forces in Scotland. Glasgow, June 1, 1679. My lord, upon Saturday's night, when my Lord Ross came into this place, I marched out, and because of the insolency that had been done Tuesday nights before at Ruglen, I went thither and inquired for the names. So soon as I got them, I sent our parties to seize on them, and found not only 3 of those rogues, but also an intercommand minister called King. We had them at Stephen about 6 in the morning yesterday, and resolving to convey them to this, I thought that we might make a little tour to see if we could fall upon a conventicle, which we did, little to our advantage, for when we came in sight of them, we found them drawn up in battelle, upon a most advantageous ground, to which there was no coming but through mosses and lakes. They were not preaching, and had got away all their women in shouldering. They consisted of 4 battalions of foot, and all well armed with fusils and pitchforks, and 3 squadrons of horse. We sent both parties to skirmish, they of foot and we of dragoons, they run for it, and sent down a battalion of foot against them. We sent 60 of dragoons, who made them run again shamefully, But in end they perceiving that we had the better of them in skirmish, they resolved a general engagement, and immediately advanced with their foot, the horse following, they came throughout the Lache, the greatest body of all made up against my troop. We kept our fire till they were within 10 pace of us, they recaved our fyr, and advanced to shock. The first they gave us brought down the coronet Mr. Crawford and Captain Bleeth, besides that with a pitchfork they made such an opening in my roan horse's belly, that his guts hung out half an ell, and yet he carried me af and myl, which so discouraged our men, that they sustained not the shock, but fell into disorder. Their horse took the occasion of this, and pursued us so hotly that we had no time to rally. I saved the standards, but lost on the place about 8 or 10 men, besides wounded, but he dragoons lost many more. They are not come easily af on the other side, for I saw several of them fall before we came to the shock. I mad the best retreat the confusion of our people would suffer, and I am now laying with my Lord Ross. The tune of Streven drew up as we was making our retreat, and fight of a pass to cut us off, but we took courage and fell to them, made them run, leaving a Dusain on the place. What these rogues will do yet I know not, but the country was flocking to them from all hands. This may be counted the beginning of the rebellion, in my opinion. I am, my lord, your lordship's most humble servant, J. Graham. My lord, I am so wearied, and so sleepy, that I have written this very confusedly.